It's all about creating conversation. Arrow.net, ARROE.net. We are unplugged and totally uncut with Scott Meslow.
Morning, Arrow. I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm very excited about this book, From Hollywood with Love, because the rise and fall and rise again of romantic comedy, that's right up my alley, because I'm one of those guys that gets off on this kind of stuff.
I'm right there with you.
What draws you to it? Is it because you can compare yourself to the comedy that's inside it? You go, that's me. That's something I know somebody would do.
I do think that's part of it. One of the reasons I love writing about rom-coms and watching rom-coms and writing this book is that I find it so relatable, and I find that everyone who finds out about the book instantly has their rom-com that they want to talk about because that's the character they were, and that's what their relationship is like.
Yeah, and we keep going back to them, even if they're on Ted Turner or something like that. We sit there and we'll go, I'll take 20 minutes to watch this again. Doesn't matter how many times you've seen it, you're still going to take the time to watch it.
Yeah. The movies that I cover in this book, I watched them each, 15, 20 times for writing the book, and I'm still not tired of them. That's part of what's fun about the genre. They are rewatchable.
Well, Pretty Woman is definitely one of those movies that I at any given moment I can watch that film. But in reading your book though, it could have been a dark story.
Oh, yeah. The whole story of Pretty Woman is completely crazy. That started as a very dark, kind of your classic kind of Oscar bait type drama where about this kind of sad, dejected prostitute who's treated very cruelly by this billionaire who then dumps her on the street at the end of the movie. And it was only when Disney got their hands on it, they did the Disney thing and quite literally turned that movie into a fairy tale.
And Richard Gere is still a part of so many people's lives and stuff like that now because he seemed to be that guy that guys wanted to be. And because, there's a little bit of every guy that goes, man, I'd like to have a night like that with a girl.
Yeah, certainly when he's up, billionaire in the penthouse with the champagne and strawberries, that's not a bad deal.
For writers, what do they know they're going into creating a rom-com? Because, to me, it's like I'm going to sit down and write a great song and it turns out to be a piece of trash. What is the winning formula here?
Yeah, I think the genre has kind of normal tropes that people keep going back to. So I think it's pretty hard. It's almost like you need to figure out if it's a comedy or a drama is the big decision you have to make. I think if you're telling a love story, but sometimes when I'm talking about the book, people say, "Oh, is The Notebook in there?" And it's like, well, that's not a very funny movie. The Notebook is a romantic drama. But I think when you really lean into the rom-com parts of it, that's the stuff that you get the meet cutes and you get running to the airport to confess your true love, that kind of thing. I think that's when you really know you're in rom-com territory. That's
interesting that you bring up The Notebook because that's one of my all-time favorite movies. And now I sit here and I think, what would happen if they would have turned it or go back into it and turn it into a rom-com? Because they keep a notebook, it's writing, they tell the story. Come on now, that can really it's a love letter to the future.
Yeah. You're right. That movie is not that far off. With a few calibrations and probably a different ending, it would be in rom-com territory. That's how close to the line some of these movies are.
I wanted Sleepless in Seattle to be a different movie. I did not want them to meet, and yet everybody just loved that idea.
How would you have ended it?
That they were there in the same city, the same time, but they never met. I always wanted to have that vibe where it was like they didn't have that eye-to-eye contact, where it left it in my imagination that, well, what if they didn't see each other? It teased me more knowing that they wouldn't have met.
Well, that's interesting. That's a little more poignant, but I think audiences would have rioted at that point. If you're going to put Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks in a movie, you want that chemistry on that skyscraper at the end. If you don't have that magical moment, you will have people throwing popcorn at the screen.
Why haven't the Oscars fallen in love with rom-coms? Because, they do affect us emotionally. We are spending a lot of great money going to these things. It supports Hollywood.
Yeah, I think rom-coms have never really fully gotten their due the way that they should have. There are rom-coms that have broken through. I cover 4 Weddings and a Funeral in the book, which was an Oscar nominee. Movies like Silver Linings Playbook, sometimes movies that people don't even really think of as rom-coms are and make it through. But interestingly, they kind of tend to be, when you think of like a classic rom-com, it's never something like a When Harry Met Sally or a Pretty Woman. They tend to be the ones that are a little darker. They're usually kind of centered on like a brooding male protagonist. Those I think are close enough to your traditional Oscar movies that there's something about it that almost gives the voters permission to say, oh, even though this is a romantic comedy, it's a serious movie, so we can kind of put it in the category now.
Do both sexes have to enjoy the movie? For instance, like when you bring up When Harry Met Sally, we're talking about a movie that men and women loved. It was a date night movie.
Yeah, I think it certainly helps. There are rom-coms that skew towards one gender or the other. The Judd Apatow movies like Knocked Up and 40-Year-Old Virgin were very much pitched toward men, but those are romantic comedies. They just kind of marketed them as raunchy comedies instead. But I do think the best romantic comedies really find a way to go straight down the middle. It's why When Harry Met Sally actually is my favorite romantic comedy, because I think it is so perfectly pitched towards both sides of the equation. And I think everyone who sees it relates to what's wrong with the other, what's wrong with that girl? Why can't she figure her stuff out? And she's doing the same thing to me. I think the really great rom-coms find a way to walk that line perfectly.
Man, you bring up Knocked Up, and then I've got 40-Year-Old Virgin. We're talking about movies that were not only rom-coms, but they were shock and awe. I mean, how did women fall in love with these movies when it was raw?
Yeah, it's Raj works for everybody. If it's funny enough, you can get away with it. Find me someone who won't laugh at Steve Carell having the hair ripped off his chest. But that is a universally hilarious joke, and if you can slip that into a love story, you've definitely got something. You have got a blockbuster there.
Something About Mary falls right into that category because, I mean, oh my God, to see that bathroom scene where things get caught up in a zipper.
Yeah. Oh, and that's such a great one. That's one that I cover in the book because they keep talking about it and you keep thinking they're not going to show it. The longer the scene goes and the more they keep talking about it, you go, they're not really going to show this on camera. And then you get that one shot of the Franks and Beans and it is so horrifying.
Do you think that was sat in a board meeting going, should we do it? Should we? How long are we going to do this? What's going to happen? Because it seems like they had to do market research on that. How would people react?
Oh, yeah, I did. I interviewed Peter Farrelly, who the co-director of that film, and a lot of other people who worked on that film for the book. And it was a constant battle with 20th Century Fox. I mean, they hated the movie. And until there were test screenings and people were rolling in the aisles, they thought they had this huge disaster, this giant dog on their hands that was going to be embarrassing and too gross for people. And the Farrellys really held the line and said, no, we think this is funny. We know what we're doing. Let us make our cut. Let us try it. But every scene that you think of as iconic from that movie, they had a huge fight to get it in there.
Yeah. Call me weird, but I think sometimes modern day rom-coms are nothing but G-rated porns.
Wow. That's an interesting thought. Yeah, I mean, the only question is whether or not they're PG-13 rated porn. But they certainly give you the same. You want to indulge in a little love fantasy. I mean, they're right there.
Yeah. I'm shocked that television hasn't followed along with this because rom-coms became so popular during the lockdown. And, we get that bit of edginess when we're watching Netflix and Hulu and stuff like that. But it's almost like, where's ABC and NBC in all of this?
Right. I think sitcoms sort of indulge in this a little bit. It's, there's a reason that I think for like an entire generation of people, their great iconic love story is Jim and Pam on The Office. Like that is very much a traditional kind of will they, won't they, one of them is in one place and one of them is the other. It's like that rom-com relationship, but they spread it over 8 seasons instead of 2 hours. So when you do that, it does sort of weird things to the relationships. But I do think it's still playing into kind of your classic rom-com tropes. Yeah,
I just wished, How I Met Your Mother would not have been on regular TV, that it would have been a streaming thing. So we could have had a little bit more edginess and I'll bet you they would have gotten away with a lot more comedy.
Oh, I'm sure that's true. And you've got How I Met Your Father on Hulu right now.
Oh, I love it. I love it. You're speaking my street, dude. I'm totally into it.
Yeah, I think it's off to a pretty good start. I'm curious to see where it's going. They're doing something just different enough.
Is streaming going to change rom-coms? Because, I sometimes a 2-hour movie is not enough. I need a good binge watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to a degree it already has. And a lot of them, streamers are the ones who really brought rom-coms back in recent years. It's clearly what happened is Netflix about 5 years ago went and looked and realized the studios weren't really making rom-coms anymore and said, we're leaving money on the table. We need to. Some people want to watch these movies. They're relatively cheap to produce. You get a good script and a good concept and a couple actors with chemistry. And so Netflix is just churning out rom-coms. Mm-hmm. But if you want to talk about, stuff that's a little edgier, I think Hulu has done some amazing stuff. I don't know if you saw Palm Springs.
Yes, I did.
What a great rom-com and very unconventional, very much doing its own thing. I would highly recommend that to people who haven't seen it. And that's the kind of thing where I go, future of rom-coms is looking really bright, especially on the streamers.
You had to have had fun putting this book together from Hollywood with love.
Yeah, it was really a blast. The people I got to talk to, the stories I like that had never been told that I got to excavate about all of these classic beloved movies. And man, so many people who hadn't really who loved working on these movies as much as people loved watching them, but had never really gotten asked, to sit down with the hairdresser on There's Something About Mary. It's, okay, walk me through doing that scene with the hair bump, and having her tell me the day they shot it and how big a debate it was, and about how big the bump is going to be, and does Cameron Diaz want to do it, and can this ever make the final cut, to kind of sit down and get those stories from people. It was truly just a delight from start to finish.
So what did you learn by doing that? Because I mean, there's a lot of slapstick, and there's a lot of things on that screen that is embedded into our human minds forever.
Yeah, I think there's a thing where I liked these movies when I first started writing this book. I gained so much more of an appreciation for just how much craft went into them. I think you can kind of, when a movie is so charming and light on its feet and easy to watch, you can kind of underappreciate it because it feels like it must have been easy, and actually that's harder to do. I mean, that's to see the level of craft, the talent on the filmmakers, or all these stories about trying to cast just the right two people who have the right chemistry to sell these love stories. It really, the alchemy of that is really difficult to pull off. I mean, sometimes you wonder how any movie gets made at all, let alone a good movie. It's so many things have to go right, it just seems impossible. And to cover 30 years of rom-coms in this book that really did it, that was just fascinating to me. Well,
this is the kind of book that you need to put on your coffee table, and the reason why is because everybody's always asking, well, what do you want to see now? What do you want to see now? And when you pick up this book and you read a little bit about what you're doing, my God, you're educating the new viewer to find these movies they haven't seen in a while or they've never seen.
Yeah, that's the goal on both sides. If it's a movie you love, I hope you read it and you find out new stories about it, and it gives you a new appreciation for this scene or that character. And if there's a movie you haven't read about in the book, I hope it makes you want to watch the movie, because there's 16 movies that I cover in detail and a lot of movies that I cover in a little less detail, and they're all great. They're all worth your time.
Would you say that your book is like the inside sleeve of an album? You're giving us the opportunity to learn something about it, and therefore we appreciate the movie a lot better?
Yeah, I hope that's how it works. It's, for me, it's always been, I like to see how it's all put together. It's sort of like when you see a really great engine, you want to take it apart and kind of figure out how it works. And so I think if anything, it'll only enhance your enjoyment. If you love There's Something About Mary, if you love How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days or Knocked Up, to have the people who made those movies explain why they work so well, I think you'd find that really interesting. I hope.
What happened with rom-coms where they kind of burned out for a little bit? Did we really get burned out? Like the 80s had if it didn't have a movie soundtrack, we didn't watch it. I mean, did rom-com, it was like, okay, I need to go find something serious now.
Yeah, I think it was a few things. I think the appetite was always there. I think the rom-coms that were coming out weren't as good. There was kind of a thing where, rom-coms always kind of exist in a little bit of a heightened cartoon reality. Like, you don't really think of these as the way real relationships actually work. But they got so ridiculous at some point where it just kind of felt like there was not even like a human character you could relate to. But it also just kind of happened at the same time as the studios in general were really just kind of running away from mid-budget movies. So it wasn't so much the decline of rom-coms as it was the decline of anything that wasn't a blockbuster or an indie. I mean, we kind of saw the road split, and rom-coms were sort of caught in this awkward middle ground where they weren't like the Oscar movies we were talking about, but they also weren't like Spider-Man. And so the studios just, the appetite seemed to go away. And I think that's where the streamers finally stepped up, because the audience still wanted them. It was that for some reason there weren't people greenlighting.
And yet you bring up Spider-Man, and I would say this latest one does have kind of a little rom-com kind of a vibe to it several times throughout the movie where, you're going, yeah, there's a little romance going on here. It's funny. I'm getting that vibe.
Yeah, I think that's part of like what has been magical about what Marvel is pulling off, why they are so good at it, is they sneak all kinds of other genre stuff into these movies. You can't just call them all superhero movies when they're also doing like 12 other things every time. And part of it is they kind of slip in the romantic subplot, again, without ever identifying some of these scenes as rom-coms. But Tom Holland and Zendaya's relationship and their kind of chemistry and the banter back and forth, that is classic rom-com stuff.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about modern day movie watching is that you don't want them to bust what the story is all about. People have learned to be silent about the funny scenes, not necessarily to go to the trailer for the first answer and stuff like that. And I think that's a fighting chance for rom-coms, because we don't go into that movie going, okay, this is where I'm supposed to laugh.
Right, totally. And I think that's you can see that in rom-coms, at least among other things, should be surprising. There's like all comedy, the joy comes from partially not knowing what's coming, and I think filmmakers are getting better at kind of figuring out how to disguise those things.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the rom-coms, because in radio, when we have morning shows and stuff like that, I'll never forget program directors telling me, remember guys, there has to be a dick, a dork, and a deer. You've got to have all three of them. And I see a lot of that inside rom-coms.
Oh yeah. No, the tropes are there for a reason. They go back to Shakespeare for a reason. Like this stuff, it really works. And I cover some of that in the book. I've got a chapter on the other guy who always gets dumped at the altar, like Bill Pullman in Sleepless in Seattle, or Patrick Dempsey in Sweet Home Alabama. I've got a different chapter on The Best Friend, where Judy Greer in particular, Judy Greer and Catherine Hahn shows up in so many of these movies, just playing a quirky best friend whose job is also just to kind of keep the plot moving, but adds so much character and charisma that you kind of don't notice, even though it's just her whole life seems to be built around like helping her friend figure out her love life.
So
I think it's really funny.
Who do you think has really? I mean, I know we talked about Julie Roberts and stuff like that, but how about Christina Applegate as well as Jennifer Aniston? These two girls have really brought some spirit forward.
Oh yeah, it's in the history of the rom-com, and especially this time period I'm covering, which is basically from When Harry Met Sally come out to today. There are so many actresses whose like career kind of came up through romantic comedies and who helped to define them. And that's two of them for sure. And and then you've got to look at Sandra Bullock.
Oh my God, yes.
Reese Witherspoon, Drew Barrymore,
yep.
And actors. I mean, honestly, Tom Hanks, as much as he's known for all of his Oscar type movies, he really came up in rom-coms with Splash and with Sleepless in Seattle. Or Hugh Grant. We certainly wouldn't have Hugh Grant without rom-com. He has kind of an ambivalent relationship with them, but he made a lot of them.
Oh my God! You say every one of those names, and my mind is going, "Oh, know that movie. Oh, know that movie. Know that movie." Because we do know them.
Yeah, and they're great. There's a reason that these actors are associated with this genre. They made such entertaining crowd pleasers. It really was just this wonderful golden era for the genre. There were so many good people making good rom-coms. So I hope this book inspires you to kind of go, oh, I have to watch that again. I haven't seen that in years.
Yep. Now let's talk about the business of movie making and stuff like that. I've talked with many daytime soap stars and stuff like that made the transition to great movies. A rom-com, is it an open door to like Tom Hanks, where it led him to greater movies that people remember him for? Yeah,
I think it's certainly in terms of like a career stepping stone. What's so great about a rom-com is it really gives you the chance to show yourself. If you're gonna break into the industry on kind of that A-list level by starring in a blockbuster, a lot of what the audience sees is going to be your stuntman. That's just how it works. But here you get to be funny. You get to play scenes with like real human emotions in them. That you get a real arc. I think it's the fastest way to make an audience fall in love with an actor in general is to put them in a romantic comedy, because if they do it well, then that was the point. You should love them by the end. And so if you're a young actor who can get locked into one of these, I would take that job.
So Seth Rogen, would you say he's the Ric Flair of rom-coms? Because that man really changed everything.
Wow. Yeah, let's go with that. I can't top it. So I'm going to sign off on that one.
I just can't imagine what the world would be like if we would not have had a Seth Rogen.
Yeah, it came so close to not happening. Really? Oh yeah, that all started because he came into a blind audition for Freaks and Geeks and did this kind of weird audition where Judd Apatow went, well, this guy's kind of funny. Like, I don't really totally get what his deal is, but I feel like there's something here. And then literally Judd Apatow just championed him through his entire career. I mean, Studio had no reason to put him in 40-Year-Old Virgin. Studio had no reason to put him in Knocked Up. They certainly didn't necessarily think of him as a leading man. But when 40-Year-Old Virgin is this huge hit and Judd Apatow says, this is my guy for the next movie, you say yes.
Wow. What's your website? Because I want people to come and follow you and give you lots of love, because you are a man with lots of information.
Oh, I appreciate it. My website is scottmeslow.com. So that's Scott, S-C-O-T-T, and Meslow is M-E-S-L-O-W. And it's got links to buy my book and other places I write, like GQ and New York Magazine.
I love it, man. Please come back to the show anytime in the future, Scott. The door is always going to be open for you.
I appreciate it. I had a blast. Thanks, Arrow.
Well, you be brilliant, okay?
You too.